Hi, welcome to the theyutazen. Welcome to episode 2 of my On This Day in K-Pop series. Almost a year ago, back in September of 2021, I introduced the first episode of the OTDK series with Woojin and his situation at the time. If you need a refresher, this series is to highlight some K-pop moments, good or bad, major or minor. On this day, today, July 26, 2020, was when Yuta Nakamoto made a friend who was a YouTuber, and when the internet found out about this YouTuber, Yuta was being attacked left and right for having a small relationship with this person. Yuta Nakamoto is one of 2 Japanese members in the SM entertainment group NCT, mainly in the unit NCT 1-7. NCT as a whole has 23 members as of now. However, back in early 2020, NCT only had 21 members, which means Shotaro, the other Japanese member, was not in the group yet. Why did I mention that? Well, because I mentioned there were 2 Japanese members, but at the time when this Yuta scandal happened, the other member was not there yet, making him the only member in NCT who was Japanese amongst the other members who were Korean, North American, Thai, Chinese, etc. If I'm not mistaken, he has spoken about how he wishes or hopes to gain more Japanese friends because he is alone. But someone fact-checked me on that. I think I just made that up, but I heard that from somewhere. I don't know, it's been 2 years since this situation. So I think it started the night before, or at least a few moments before the outburst on Twitter, but what caused it, the outburst? What happened? Yuta had gone on vlive and he mentioned that he came across this YouTuber who lives in Korea but happens to be Japanese, just like Yuta, and he followed the guy on Instagram and was talking to him. Yuta seemed happy and excited to meet this new Japanese friend he can relate to and gave him a shout out to his channel. I guess many fans took the time to check out that guy's channel and did not like what they saw. So what everyone found out was that this YouTuber had anti-Korean pro-Japanese ideals. He had used Sully and Junghyun, may they rest in peace, as clickbait for his YouTube videos, along with having misogynistic videos. Everybody is upset about this interaction because, well, Yuta is a Japanese K-pop idol in Korea, and befriending someone with these controversial views, it paints him a very bad picture. Shortly after the news was brought up, everyone on Twitter was acting up. People begging for an explanation, people forming their own theories as to how this went to play, people demanding Yuta to leave the group, and were sending him death threats. And that's how it all went down, and now to dissect everything in between. I mentioned earlier the words anti-Korean and pro-Japanese. Well, what does that mean and what does it have to do with this? It's the main reason why this is a scandal in the first place, and if you do not understand this concept, then it's hard to understand why lots of people are angry in general. This has to do with the tense history between the both nations, South Korea and Japan. To put it into simplest terms, but detailed enough to get the idea, here's what someone wrote for me who is more knowledgeable about this. Japan and Korea are 2 Asian powers both in politics, economy, and in culture. Despite this, there are still some issues from the past that remain unfinished. So in this PDF, I will explain why it is. Why after so much time the tension continues and how it originated, among other important topics to know to understand this better. The Korean peninsula has always been a strategic territory. The Japanese knew it in the last century, but also America. This meant that the Japanese Empire wanted to use it as a battlefield against the Russian Empire in 1904. Although Korea had just named itself an empire, and they ended up being forced to sign a protocol accepting the intervention of Japan in its territory to use it as a battlefield. In September 1905, the Treaty of Portsmouth ended the Russo-Japanese War with a Japanese victory, but it will not be the only thing that Japan obtains from that conflict. Just 2 months later, the Korean Empire is stripped of its diplomatic sovereignty and officially becomes its protectorate through the Treaty of Ulsa. This treaty, which was not officially declared null and void until 1965, long after the Korean peninsula was divided by the 30th parallel, only got the signature of 5 ministers, since Emperor Gojong of Korea refused to sign it. Although Gojong tried to garner support from European and Asian leaders, his diplomatic efforts were in vain. In the shameful absence of international assistance, Korea not only illegally became a protectorate, but 5 years later it will end up as a Japanese colony. The trigger was the assassination of the leader Hirobumi in 1909 at the hands of the Korean nationalist An Jung-gun. During the occupation, both the emperor and his wife were spared, but were confined in their palace. This situation of vassalage fueled the anti-Japanese nationalist feeling that would mark the history, politics, and society of Korea until today, and determine the current conflict with Japan. There was also an occupation by the Japanese, considered illegal, to whom many of the Koreans were forced to work in naval industries, construction, and mining, and those who managed to stay on the peninsula were not treated very well either. This Japanese colonization, with the excuse of innovation and industries, lasted 35 years, leaving the Korean country with various and serious debts. But in 1901, Japan began to recognize Korean lands, and through its Ministry of Finance, enacted laws in 1912 allowing the Japanese to expropriate Koreans. And they were not only deprived of their land but forced to work on it to deliver the profits to the Japanese government, despite the fact that the Korean people lived on the brink of starvation. Japanese colonization was not the only thing that made Koreans hate the Japanese, but those comfort women, who were actually girls between 13 and 19 years old, used for Japanese soldiers to relax. Simply put, they were minors used as sex slaves during World War II. And although many years have passed since these incidents, the truth is that history punishes the past with the present. Many Koreans nowadays continue to hate Japan for these incidents, forcing these ministers and governors to pay compensation for injuring them. Taking that into account, here are some facts to further understand why Koreans do not forgive Japan. Various Japanese prime ministers have acknowledged the brutalities committed by their ancestors and have publicly apologized. Miyazawa started in 1982, followed by Murayama, Hashimoto, and Koizumi. Former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe met with then South Korean President Park Geun-hye in 2015 to agree on $8.7 million in compensation. However, the questions remain as open as the wounds. Is money and an apology enough to wipe the slate clean, ending the conflict between Japan and Korea? Koreans deny it. The only thing the Halmoni want is to have a voice, for history to be called by its name and for it to be known in the world so that it doesn't happen again. However, his descendants and much of South Korean society believes that Japan should do more. But what has he done so far? In addition to repeat apologies and acknowledgement of the mistakes, in 1965 Japan agreed to pay back in loans as compensation for the costs and suffering of the war. Operations have also been carried out to return the illegally expropriated land. In 2012, the South Korean Supreme Court ruled that Japanese companies involved in forced labor must compensate the relatives of the victims. In 2015, Japan created a fund of $9 million for comfort women, after in 2014 it was signed an irreversible and final treaty with South Korea on the matter. However, it was worth nothing. Moon Jae-in unilaterally suspended it. Although the suffering of the Korean people is undeniable, from the Japanese perspective they ask, what more do you want? Well, objectively speaking, the suffering of the post-war Korean people is almost impossible to solve. as well as other problems of neighboring countries, have been colonized by the Spanish, Americans, French, and English, among others. The Japanese-Korean conflict dates back to the war and post-war years lasting until today, caused by the colonization and expropriation of supposedly Korean lands. If we speak objectively, both Japan and Korea have made mistakes and despicable acts that no matter how much you pay compensation, the past is not fixed with the present. Also, even if it hurts, we must accept it and learn from it so as not to repeat it ever again. Because in the century we're in, the union of these two great nations, the union of these two great Asian powers could bring great benefits to both countries. So hearing a brief history, hopefully this was good enough since I myself am not Korean or Japanese to really know and understand this, which brings me to this next point. So from what I saw, Korean fans were upset, and they have every right to be, but international fans seem to be angrier than the Korean fans and are talking over them when the majority of the international fans do not understand this history and why it's a big deal for Koreans, which was so frustrating to see. So along with international fans speaking as if they were affected by this, they had some theories as to what might have happened because actually SM Entertainment nor Yuta made any statement to fill us up on what happened, so we were really out here piecing things together. Which is fine, I mean not the SM ignoring everything part, but I mean people making quote-unquote theories on what happened because it's not quite speaking over anyone, it's just trying to explore other factors to comprehend what could have happened with the lack of interaction.
The lack of interaction can lead to destruction.
Many people nowadays kind of just see what's in front of them and assume the worst or what's just vaguely given than sitting down and using critical thinking on what other things might have happened, giving other options. Might be the worst or what angry people were thinking, but at least you got to understand other points of view. Here's an example of a theory to which I agree very much. So this person was basically putting up a scenario which could make sense to put us into the perspective if this were to happen to us, and made it into a format where instead of names, they used variables. Basically saying that they contact each other to become friends and find them interesting, and they speak the same languages. The YouTuber being a shitty person, but his latest uploads seemed normal and not exposing any shittiness of the YouTuber, so person A thinks he's cool. Person A finally finds someone he can reach out to and can understand, considering his existing friends are of course there but not as alike as him. Though the YouTuber had been a creator for years, you would most likely not stalk them, especially when being a creator for years. It's too much content. He goes on live to tell everyone about the new friend he met and recommending the channel to his viewers, but his viewers found out about who B really was. When this gets brought up to person A, he follows person B immediately, and he goes under fire. And unfortunately, person A is a big public figure in pop culture, plus his nationality and the history behind his nationality pertaining his Korean audience. It's just a big clusterfuck. And because of this, it's getting too blown out of proportion, especially with international fans peeping their heads into business they do not understand. So if this were you, if you were person A, wouldn't have you done the same thing? Plus, with how Yuta is a woke person, so it wouldn't make sense for him to do this when he's already talked about the conflict. So the uproar of comments, especially from netizens, are unnecessary and very ignorant. Like every scandal, we have fans being very upset with the idol or artist and taking their anger out on the artist and taking it up to Twitter to voice their emotions, and sometimes go as far as emailing the company. Most of these comments are frustration with the whole thing, but some of the mean comments are from people who do not like NCT, let alone Yuta, and are taking this moment to be horrendous without consequences, disguising themselves as very upset fans. The thing is, whether you are a fan and are very upset, or a hater who is using this scandal to your advantage, death threats and other comments that induce harm or poke fun at their image are not cool. It's not the first time Yuta had hate, but it was usually because he is Japanese and he has Japanese features that many anti-fans make fun of him for, which is very racist and xenophobic of them to do. So this isn't Yuta's first rodeo. Though he never had a scandal as bad as this, I mean, he did once have a scandal where he wore a shirt with a controversial text in it, but this one was much more impactful. And not only that, it didn't make sense how Yuta was getting so much hate when the YouTuber is the problematic one. But again, Yuta is more known to the public versus the YouTuber, and Yuta has a lot of antis. Yantis? So that pissed me off. And what pissed me off the most was the fact that these people were fans spewing horrible things to Yuta, hoping he would leave the group before anything was said, along with much worse things said about him. Then once the news about how it was an anti all along, people basically pretended like they did not say all of the shit I previously mentioned. Like, no, I will not forgive you, so if I ever find out you were one of those people that flipped-flop like that, you are dead to me, and I do not respect you. Clearly, since you proved you cannot respect Yuta before anything gets official. Fuck you. If I am being honest, I was almost discouraged to do this episode because, well, there was not that much information about this because like most drama in K-pop, especially Twitter, people move on like nothing happened. We technically did not get a clear answer on how this all tied up to a bow and instead was more like crumpled to the trash can or let out for the rain to wash away. After 2 years, we never got a statement from SM. Technically, we didn't need to because literally on the demise of all of it, it was just exposed that, oh, an anti started it. That was the outcome of it all, and that's it. But it was never confirmed that if there were anything else to that story. There were some empty slots with the story and it was hard to research because it was just too hectic, too fast. Everything happened in like 3 days, and once people found out that it was an anti, then no one freaking cared. So then I came up with a post since May on my Twitter and Instagram with some questions of the holes I felt were missing, such as, what was the name of the YouTuber? His name is Rikun, I think, but as I searched on YouTube for some reason he did not appear. And what was his content like? And I asked for someone who did get to watch his stuff because I felt like all the international buzz talking about how bad his channel was most likely word of mouth or at least word of tweet, and never even dove deep to watch the videos. Which goes back to the part where I mentioned that Yuta most likely didn't go deep and basically stalked the guy. So if you didn't even take the initiative to check the channel for yourself, how do you expect Yuta to go that far? Was there a name who started the rumor? My previous On This Day in K-pop video, I did get to provide the person who started the Kim Woojin rumor, but this time there wasn't a name, so I cannot provide the actual person who started the whole thing, but it was confirmed that it was just a Yuta anti. Is there a video available of the Yuta vlive? So I watched some drama channels about the Yuta scandal, and some said that the vlive is no longer available to find. I wanted to provide the clip of the vlive to obviously show what, when, and where it happened, but it is nowhere to be found from what I searched. Just more info about the YouTuber. In the story it said that Rikun was Japanese that lives in Korea and speaks Korean and Japanese. But as I was trying to conduct research, I saw a post somewhere saying that Rikun was not Japanese in the first place, that he was full Korean but knew how to speak Japanese. So if the YouTuber was Korean, Why would he have anti-Korean ideals? I know most of us have this thing where we are racist to our own race and ethnicity. Like, I do it all the time. I talk shit about Hispanic Mexicans while I'm being Hispanic Mexican at the same time, but that's mostly for jokes. But with this involves history with Korea and Japan, which is an history very tense, so which one is it? I wanted to know if there were any misconceptions of the whole thing. Like, did anybody say things that were not true besides the fact that Yuta is pro-Japan? But, like, was there any other information that was said and spoken to be a crucial fact of the story, but it just wasn't? I guess the example I said previously would be an example of maybe people kept saying this YouTuber was Japanese, but the whole time he wasn't. I would have thought there would be some errors here and there because of how hectic it was. It's Twitter and international fans basically took over this, so there would be unnecessary chaos in like a game of telephone where I can say my ult bias is Yuta, and by the time it gets to the end, what I initially said would be butchered to something completely different. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were errors and misconceptions, but there were none that I could find. And finally, how was it resolved? So the resolution came out to be a Yuta anti started this whole thing, but how did we find out? How did we get there? 'Cause I found nothing. So yeah, I wanted all of these questions answered, but nobody seemed to reach out besides the person who volunteered to give me information on the Korea and Japan history. So this was almost a flop because what's the point of posting a video with a heavy scandal and I hardly have any information, but I managed to make something out of it because I thought we could learn something from this situation. But if you have anything to add on this, like if you remembered this situation or could fill in the blanks for me, please let me know. So I barely found information to really inform what happened here, but I did learn a few things outside of the situation itself. Stay neutral. Don't go picking sides immediately. If all you have is an allegation, do not even bother deciding to pick a side. Just wait till more info gets put out and then think. Speaking of think, use your brain. Some K-pop stans do not know how to use their brains. Not only do anti-fans use scandals to take advantage, but sometimes fans are so gullible or stubborn to look at other sides. Yuta is woke as fuck. Yuta is known for being very respectful toward women and have spoken about the Japanese and Korean conflict. Though Yuta seems intimidating, he is very knowledgeable about these things. And if you were not an anti and actually cared about Yuta and NCT as a whole, this is one of the most basic stuff about Yuta you should know. If you aren't the targeted group offended, shut up. Usually there are things that have controversy, but sometimes you don't have to be the group offended to understand because it's common sense. I guess kind of like this one, but for international stans being like, yeah, I cannot believe this happened. I'm so disappointed at Yuta, and on behalf of the Korean community, I'm going to speak, even though I am not Korean myself. Like, what? If I recall correctly, I think Koreans were upset, yes, but not so much. I heard that international fans blew it out of proportion. If you are here to just insult people without any consequences and pretend like you didn't say that shit, don't be a K-pop stan. Don't make things so hectic to where the story isn't unfolding. We need every piece we can get. I am tired of the another scandal. Oh wait, just an anti? Okay, never mind. Like what? It only makes sense that I remember this moment because not only was it prominent for the 3 days it happened, but Yuta is my bias in NCT, and not only that, my old bias in general. And seeing how things went down, seeing everyone giving him hate, demanding him to leave the group, making xenophobic, racist comments because he is Japanese, and just flat out death threats and hopes that he would off himself, angered the hell out of me. It really pissed me off because y'all are nobodies on the internet and you're trying to justify disgusting acts just because you're hiding behind a K-pop profile picture or a profile picture that does not show your face and have a username that isn't your actual name. It's so sick that you're a common person doing normal people things, then become an anonymous monster on the internet. Then just to lock your phone and go on to school or work or just life as if nothing happened. You do not know these people, and you are very much not the boss of these idols to make these decisions for them, when most of the time, especially the new demographic of K-pop stans nowadays are minors. The netizens are minors, and you want to boss these grown-ass people, and in a disgusting way. And even if you are not a minor, you cannot tell them what to do,
just like they cannot tell us what to do. The thing that pissed me off the most, and it does not just happen with Yuta, it happens with many idols who get into these messy types of scandals, and fans jump to conclusions and do the stupid thing, which is to insult the hell out of the idol they once loved. But when it's confirmed that they were the victim of the scandal, people will act like they just did not scream how they want their idols to end their life or leave the group and pretend that nothing happened. Not only is that a fake ass thing to do, but it gives the idol trust issues, because imagine the people you love or thought had your support turn on you heavily just for them to be proven wrong and be like, ah haha, never mind, just pretend I did not just freaking shout on you on the internet. Anyway, love you. When's the next comeback? Like, shut the fuck up, get out, you hypocrite. Netizens tend to jump into conclusions, and I have mentioned this with my Lucas video that it's a pet peeve of mine when people seem to immediately pick a side. Though when it comes to picking sides, the type of scandal is usually like alleged victim versus K-pop idol figure. But for this case, it's more like believing Yuta has controversial ideals versus not. And when it comes to any idol, people would rather immediately go believe the bad thing that the idol quote unquote did, thinking it's the right thing to do, and then ignore anything that sheds light to the situation. But the right thing to do is to be neutral and wait till you see any evidence or anything that shows something. Also, everything is not black and white. There is a gray area. So you might think, hey, he's a good guy, but many different factors might debunk that, or vice versa. Like you might be hard on him, saying that he's a bad person, but think about other factors that make him look good, if that makes sense, because that's what I do. If an idol ends up being on one side of the spectrum, I won't be surprised, because I thought about different outcomes that can happen. Expect the worst, but hope for the best at the same time, so you won't be surprised, and most importantly, you won't look like a fucking idiot. Though this seemed like a heavy and career-ending situation for Yuta, but like always, he's kept his cool as everything unfolded, or lack thereof, to unfold. This just goes to show that anybody, and especially the people who dislike you, can start harmful rumors just because they dislike you. Sorry, this time the video wasn't that informative like the previous episode, but to close off this episode of OTDK, and hopefully I can do future videos with substantial information, but I hope you learned something about today, July 26th, 2 years ago, on this day in K-pop. Thanks for watching. Wait, before we go, I just wanted to take the time to thank everyone who has subscribed to this channel, because I recently hit 100 subscribers. I hit it about 3 to 5 days ago, but I didn't want to celebrate and then someone unsubscribes, because that has happened to me before and it was very embarrassing. But they decided to stay, so yay! I apologize for the horrible uploading schedule. To be honest, I had a bunch of things going on, and because of that, I hardly felt motivated to make videos, which explains my lack of uploads. I was burnt up, but I'm trying to figure out a way to balance my life, school, I'll be getting a job soon, and my mental health, along with my YouTube channel and many other things. The 2021-2022 year was kind of a slap to my face, because all of a sudden I forgot how to function as a human being going back to the real world. But I want to make this YouTube thing work and continue to make this kind of K-pop content.
I'm slowly getting my motivation again, and I'm figuring out how to manage my time better, and soon enough I'll be making my same old type of content, but maybe with better quality soon, and most importantly, a better spirit. Thanks for sticking around. Plus, not to be those YouTubers, but I know most of you guys aren't subscribed because 91% of my viewers are not subscribed. And I'm not gonna force you like others will, but if you like what you see and if you want to see more videos like these, I suggest you do so. Thank you again, and I'll see you guys on the next one.